Yeah.
All right, so we've already done introductions, but if you could introduce yourself, talk about maybe where you grew up and kind of how you ended up at Vanderbilt.
All right, my name is Betsy Hay, and my mother's family was actually Murfreesboro, Tennessee, but my mother, after she married, moved to New York, and Dad's job was there. So when I was first born, I started out in New York City and then basically grew up in Westchester County, which was right outside the city. And it was a very rarefied community because I didn't realize at the time, because so many people worked in the city and it was a bedroom community for the city. We had all these world famous people who were in the community, and I just assumed that, that's the way life was. So got exposed to a lot of wonderful opportunities because of it. So it was very helpful to have that as a basic background growing up.
Yeah. And you said you're a grad student at Vanderbilt. So where did you go to undergrad?
Right. I started out at Randolph-Macon Women's College in Lynchburg, Virginia, and was a sociology biology major. And after I graduated, then I was debating what to do. And my original idea was to go on maybe in sociology, but turned out there was a special program in New York City at Columbia University where through Teachers College, they were going ahead and having a program where they took people who already had a college degree and fast-tracked them through nursing. So I looked into the program and decided to go ahead and go and do that. The irony is that a couple of weeks before I went for that interview, we had people on campus at Randolph-Macon, and it was to be an IBM computer programmer. So I took that basic test for that, and they offered me a job. But said, of course, it's something that you would never be able to finish that test because, it had so many questions and all. Well, lo and behold, 2 weeks later, when I went to Columbia, they said, we just want you to do this test while you are here. Now, it's just a basic test. You'll never finish. Well, it turned out it was the same test I'd just taken 2 weeks before. And as a result, right or wrong, I remembered, what I had answered there. So I went ahead, finished the test, and had 10 minutes left over. And so within 10 days, I got an acceptance from Columbia and didn't tell them till later on what had happened because turned out some of the other students said, we were terrified because we've never seen anybody who was able to finish that test. And I said, well, you never asked why I was able to do it. That was why. So that was just a lot of fun thinking about that.
And then what brought you to Vanderbilt from there?
Well, after practicing for a while in nursing, I had several jobs within New York City and then had gone to Liberia, West Africa, where I helped run a hospital in Harbel, Liberia, which was the Firestone rubber plantation. Decided that I had gone probably about as far as I was going to within the profession unless I had a higher degree. So I started looking around and I thought, well, from Randolph-Macon, I have Virginia, I have New York City for Columbia, where else in the country? And so I started looking around, and my mother gently said, well, we have relatives, near Nashville. Why don't you look at Vanderbilt? And then, of course, it was never pushed, but actually I'm the third generation that went to Vanderbilt. But my grandfather went and was the class of 1901, pharmaceutical chemist, PhD, of all things. That's a degree they don't have anymore. But so he was a pharmacist, and then some of my uncles went, my mother went, and so forth, undergrad. And so decided that they had a special program for nurses again, and there was a former dean who unusually was a male nurse, which was highly unusual at that time, and to be a dean of a nursing school was quite unusual. He had created this new model trying to link practice and education. So the idea was if we would get a degree at a master's level, we could be clinical nurse specialists and go ahead, be the expert practitioner, and actually be in charge of a patient division at Vanderbilt. And at the same time, then for 30% of our job, we would be faculty at the School of Nursing. So that was that specific model at that time, and I was intrigued by it, so I applied for the program, and that was the one what brought me to Vanderbilt.
You mentioned that having a male nurse as a dean was rare. So was your program entirely women, or were there any men in your program?
We had one male nurse in the program with me. Yes, it was highly unusual. 99% of nursing at that time was female. So there were a lot of pressures at that time of what to do. And I felt sorry for any man going into it because they were very suspect. Why would you want to be a nurse versus a doctor? And trying to look at that at the same time, we had all kinds of challenges in the nursing career because we were a female profession. And of course, at that time, the physicians were, overwhelmingly male. So it was a male-female kind of thing, and the power gradient was so different.
Mm-hmm. Once you got to Vanderbilt, how was the environment at Vanderbilt different from what you'd experienced growing up in New York or even going to school in Virginia?
Well, first of all, of course, at Randolph-Macon, it was a women's college and very, very close-knit. And at the same time, their mission was to make sure that no female student hid. Everybody had to be in charge of something or get up and speak. So we were not shrinking violet, shall we say. And at Columbia, it was pretty much a hotbed of people from all over the world, and that was a very challenging time anyway, but it was very international. So to come to Vanderbilt, Vanderbilt at that time was very regional, and it was a total shock to arrive. And I mean, I literally had somebody say, well, we are Vanderbilt, so you should be grateful to be able to be here. And I looked at him, I thought, you must be kidding me that you're saying this. And there was a very elitist tone in many, many ways. I got the impression that in some quarters in town, there was a lot of resentment from the townies about Vanderbilt's imprint kind of thing. There were a lot of wonderful people there at the same time, but I had to laugh because shortly after being here and realizing how grateful I should be to be here, I went to a nursing convention, and they always put your name and where you're from. And I thought, all right, I'm from world famous Vanderbilt. And I looked down and it said, Betsy Hay, University of Vanderbilt. And I thought, well, I guess they're not quite as nationally recognized as they thought. But, that was a percentage of the people. I don't want to go ahead and say Vanderbilt was totally like that, but that was some of the flavor at that time that came through.
Yeah. You mentioned that there were a lot of different expectations and stereotypes of the nurses within your program. What were some of those characteristics, and what were those stereotypes, especially within maybe the Vanderbilt women?
Well, nursing itself was at very much of a crossroads. We've had a very interesting history within nursing. At one time, it was the lowest of the low. if you want to empty the jails and the prostitutes, here, be a nurse. At the same time, we've had the whole thing, you're an angel of mercy, so therefore nobody could ever marry. You have to be in pure white, and you are, probably make, Mother Teresa look like, a degenerate. It was to be absolutely the best of the best. So we've had both of these, this alpha to omega kind of burden to deal with. The part of the challenge was as the women's movement started to come into being, we were somewhat suspect. Because when it first was starting out, and they said, well, what kind of job, if any, do you want? Basically, people are looking, do you want to be a secretary? Do you want to be a nurse? I mean, do you want to be a teacher? Those were sort of the big three. So when you started getting more of the feminists going, then they're saying, oh, you're a nurse, you're traditional. We want people who really want to do something really with their life versus the old school. At the same time, a lot of us were trying to make the nursing field progress and all, and we came definitely into contact with the physicians who really they were in charge. I mean, when you have a fee-for-service environment, and they basically told Vanderbilt and anywhere else that, hi, we're the ones why the patients come, so you cater to us, otherwise we won't bring our patients there. You'll lose money. And at that time, we said nursing will never progress unless we go ahead and are not factored in as part of the room rate. And that was it. So we were seen as an expense versus anything that brought money in. So until all that changed, we were, having a rough time. Mm-hmm. But over time, things did progress.
So you mentioned the women's movement. Were you involved with the women's movement on campus at all, or was there even an active presence with the women's movement on campus?
Not a tremendous amount, because the center was really just getting started right after I had graduated. Now, one thing that I did get involved in, some of the people who had some affiliation with the Women's Center decided they'd like to pull some of the women together, and so they had a women's investment club and said, let's learn more about finances. And some of the people who got involved in that were out of the library system. And I saw this flyer and I thought, this sounds rather interesting, and I don't know people across campus. I think I'll get involved and go to a meeting. Had a wonderful opportunity to meet a lot of fascinating people and made some linkages across campus. And the funny part about it is, when I think about it, that is 40 some odd years later, some of those people had said, by the way, do you play tennis? And I said, yes. And they said, well, we have this tennis group. I'm still playing tennis with these people. So that has been a lifelong thing, which has just been wonderful. And that's one of the advantages of some of the people going to Vanderbilt. Elsewhere, everybody left town. But so many people still live here in the area, so we still keep up together and celebrate occasions, and I'm going there for Thanksgiving and all of that. So that has been just a wonderful thing. So in some ways, I would say yes, the Women's Center really made a difference and was a tremendous help that way.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you were able to have a community of women within the program, within campus? I mean, you were talking just about how it helped you find those people.
Very much so. Again, nursing was in a very peculiar position at that point because we're a practice profession. And we we were positioned between the medical center and what we always call the grass and trees side, which is more the academic fields. And so many of the academic fields had had centuries of being the terminal degree is PhD, and we are the university. And now they weren't quite sure what to do with one that practiced. How are you really fitting into a university? Is your rigor sufficient? How do we handle you? And aside from that, we were a bunch of women. So that was a challenge, and it's my understanding that Blair music sort of hit some of that same kind of idea. How do you look at a practice group and look at excellence that way? Because, of course, you see, we were under the same idea for tenure and promotion, and how do you evaluate that? So we were a little bit unusual, and it was a challenge trying to sell what we were doing, because especially at that time, we realized that until you have your own body of knowledge and things that others could understand, then that was the coin of the realm. So it took a while to get to that point, and nursing had to evolve, and really now, much later in this, it's coming into its own because there are many more people at a doctoral level. Because when I did get my PhD, there was, I think, less than 2% of nurses had it. So now it's much greater, and so now we're having our own body of knowledge.
You also mentioned that you worked as a faculty member. How would you say that experience was different as a grad student and then a faculty member?
Well, to backtrack a little bit, I came in at the era when Richard Nixon was president. And what happened was I was working actually at the VA in hemodialysis because I'd been trained. I ran a hemodialysis unit in New York. And so I found that I could come be a staff nurse at the VA, and then they said they'd give me release time to go part-time to the Vandy program, and so it was all set up. But the government came back, and for some reason, Nixon decided that they had to get rid of a lot of money within 1 year that had been given scholarship assistance for 2 years. So you can imagine no school wants to give back any money. So I got this phone call from Vanderbilt that said, we know that you're going part-time and all that, but let us make you a deal. How would you like this? We will go ahead and totally pick up all your tuition. We will give you a stipend of $200 a month, but the thing is, you have to go full-time instead of part-time. Second of all, we have to start using the money before July 1. So you, instead of going 3 semesters, you'll have to go 4 semesters. So I thought about it, and I thought $200 stipend. I think at that time I was paying $150 for rent. So I thought, I guess I could swing this, and to pick up all this. So I said, okay, I'll go ahead and go. Well, what made the difference is I then started school with a group that was ending up. And so I already had 1 semester under my belt when my real class showed up. Well, the faculty said, oh, well, since you already know where stuff is, said, well, here, tell you what, why don't you go ahead and tell us some of the things you'd like to do. So I actually was able to customize some of my Vanderbilt program. And then they wanted to hire me as faculty. So while I was still a student, they gave me keys to a spare faculty office, so I just set up shop, and I was treated extremely well, and it was really rather funny, but it was delightful. I mean, I had carte blanche to do a lot of things. I ended up doing, far more numerically wise, taking courses and doing things more than was required, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. So it was a customizable kind of experience and got me off to a great start when I got out of school.
Were you able to interact a lot with your students once you were a faculty member?
Oh, yes. Yes, that's what I especially loved. I really enjoyed that dual role, even though it was a very challenging time-wise and energy-wise one. But by being the person in charge of a patient division, then I knew what was the condition of all the patients. I also was in charge of the staff, so I could go ahead and place students where I thought they could get the best experience, and then find out what staff could be the most help to them, and then be able to show that I was the clinical expert, so had credibility as a faculty member for the students, and then hopefully that I could place them with the staff nurses so they could get the best role models, knowing what happens when they got out. So I thought that was fascinating to do, but I think over time it was a killer job too, because it required, dual things, because in the faculty role, then of course they say, well, we want you to be in charge of different committees, and then go over to the medical school side and the center side, and they'd say, well, we also need you to be on these committees. And so you were torn.
Mm-hmm. What was the gender breakdown of the students where you were teaching? Was it also mostly female? Did you start to see more men in your classes the longer you taught there? Or
over time, saw some more male students, but in general, it still was a fairly small percent of time. What we would tend to see, well, nationally, would be any time we had a war. People would be EMTs, or they would do different things and come off from the battlefield and say, well, okay, what is it that I can do? Well, maybe I'll go into nursing. But the men in general would choose really high profile, lots of equipment, fast-paced kind of jobs, or I want to be in charge, versus I don't know anyone who said I want to be a staff nurse on the general medical surgical floor. So it tended to split what the men wanted to do.
all right. So would you say that you faced any sort of gender-based discrimination while a faculty member at Vanderbilt?
Probably very little, because we stayed reasonably within our own world. I would say when I was on the faculty senate, there was maybe just some occasional pushback from, as I said before, some of the ones who were the very strict academic, and wondering, what is this nursing thing is, and is this a little too touchy-feely versus, that real academic rigor. I would say I had more of a challenge on the medical side, because it was of that era when the doctors were the men and they were in charge. And Again, I had a lot of the ones who were really helpful, so I don't want to characterize them all the same. But, of course, the ones that are the outliers you always remember. But I remember one time when a woman was ready to go home, and she really needed some help at home. The family was unable to do it, so the natural thing was to go ahead and call in the social worker and get some help and all. And I had one of the attendings come, and he just said, this is my patient. I can give her everything she needs. If I ever need anything from anyone else, I will let you know. I was thinking, woo! So you had some of that, holdover from the old plantation system, but I just thought, I don't believe this. This is amazing, but that was part of it too.
In general, how would you characterize the attitudes that they had towards the nurses, the physicians?
Again, being in charge, anytime we would want to advance a bit, there was always a bit of pushback because power is never in a vacuum. I guess one of the biggest surprises to me was to arrive on the patient division, and at that time we had 3 shifts of nurses, so you would have patient report when one group is talking to the next shift, and said, all right, where are we going to have the report? And so I'm looking at where our office is. I've never heard that. It was in the ladies' room. And I said, in the ladies' room? I said, well, that's the only space that we have. So here we had the stalls here, and we had all these chairs, and we're taking report. And I just said, I don't believe this. That still amazes me. But that was the last couple of years when we were in the old hospital. And the bottom line is they didn't want to spend any money because they said, we're about to have this bond issue to float the new hospital, so don't want to spend any money on anything. And obviously we had very little room, but we were low man on the totem pole on that one.
How did you see those change? You said you were there right after the openings of the Women's Center, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you
Yes.
see that change after the Women's Center opened, as the women's movement became bigger? How did you see those attitudes change?
Well, I think that as I would say more equality to a certain extent. For us directly, what made a difference was probably more national. And that was as the physicians were getting more pressure to be part of a team versus being the only one in charge and, delegating everything that they didn't want to someone else. When the insurance companies started coming, that made a very big difference. For instance, a little bit later on, I became one of the associate deans, and that was when we were trying faculty practice. And so as we were trying to set up some of the beginning faculty practices, we went to the medical center to look about space and all of that, and were told flat out that they really didn't want to do it because it would cost them money. And we were saying, well, all of our studies nationally show that nurses can deliver a lot of this care much cheaper, so that will save money. The answer was, no, there's no doctor who is going to do less in order for you to do anything, so you're going to cost us money, so we don't want to do it. So that door was shut to us, so it took several more years before things opened up. But it was very incremental, and it was a lot of start and stops and trying to see how we could develop this team approach. Finally, some of the things that made a difference is when there were enough studies that started talking about the quality of patient care and how they were having more problems, patient problems, if they didn't have the team approach, that finally there were some pressures on them to even begrudgingly have a little bit more of a team approach. Now, we did have some of the physicians that understood that from the very beginning, and it was a tremendous help, and everybody looked and said, well, gee, why do you think their patients do so much better? That was why. they had the team. But eventually, all of that came, and a lot of it was from data, and as nursing did more studies to show nationally, and the world changed. People were beginning to demand more.
All right. So what would you say was your favorite memory of your time at Vanderbilt over the years?
Realistically, I think it was the people. I just loved it. I adored our patients. I really enjoyed watching people learn and grow. It was so much fun. And even now, I mean, when I look at it, I see around town some of my former students who are now parents and everything. And so they will come and catch me up on what all is going on. And some of them have really gone on to some wonderful careers. And I just love that fact of the growth of it. And also, the thing that I'm really excited about is seeing how Vanderbilt has evolved. I really think what a difference it has made, because one of the things that was beyond startling to me at the very beginning, the nursing school was linked to the hospital through an old tunnel system. And it was sort of a subterranean tunnel, and that's where they kept old beds, equipment, and all that kind of stuff. Well, to go through that tunnel, and I started looking and thinking, isn't this odd? It looks like there are all these bathrooms down here. Why? And seeing on the door, they had all these screw holes where obviously there had been something on there, but there were just these holes left. And I finally asked, I said, what is that? That's where the minorities had always had to come from the hospital to use the restrooms. I was stunned that had been, and it had only been discontinued a few years before I got there, evidently. So that was a big surprise. So now, to see where we have people from all over the world, I see the tremendous team approach, and even nationally, the thing is, instead of being in the room rate, guess what? They're now going ahead advertising how you'd want to come to this hospital because we have the best nursing care. And so their quality measures to designate who is, just like we have the grand trauma centers and all that kind of thing, there's national ranking for nursing. So, and then the pharmacists are coming into it, the tremendous research that's going on. But I love the wealth of the student body from all over the world, this cross-fertilization, different perspectives. I just think it's terribly exciting.
What was your favorite part about interacting with the student body?
Probably when there were several kinds of students. Actually, the most fragile ones were the A students. And they were so fragile because they couldn't imagine getting anything less than an A. And if so, it would be total failure, they'd fall apart. So trying to work with some of those to say, wait a minute, what is important in life here, and you will still get into graduate school, that kind of thing. So it was working with that type of student at the same time, especially with the ones who may not be the brightest lights, but to give them the confidence, let's see what it is you can do, and why can't you do something like this, and finally figuring out some way they could achieve things. I mean, a very simple example, I had somebody who is just totally terrified of needles. And in most everything that we do, at least get out of nursing school, you are going to have to give an injection sometime. And so to work through all of that and get them competent and confident that they could do that. That's just one small example. But learning, where are the areas that somebody needs something, and can that help them along their way to get some confidence? And because ultimately the bottom line is we had life and death, and so probably the ones I would say I came down the hardest on are those who decided they wouldn't study and just said, hey, look, never going to have you take care of me or any member of my family or anyone I know, so it's either this or, ship out. So, sometimes it had to be a little bit hardcore too. And every now and then, it didn't happen often, but every now and then it'd have somebody whose parent wanted them to do it. And they said, I really don't want to do this. And I said, well, then let's talk this over further. And then, working it out, either I would help or get somebody else to help and have a family discussion to say, this just isn't for them, and this isn't the right place to be. Your child needs to be somewhere that they can be successful and happy. And the nursing profession isn't this place for them. So, and I had some come back later and say, oh, thank you. It made a difference. And said, thank you on behalf of nursing, too.
I guess, how would you say that your perspective on Vanderbilt has changed since leaving? You were talking about how you'd like to see its growth, but I guess looking back on where it was now and comparing it to where it is right now.
Yeah, I'm just so amazed because really I can genuinely say it's world class. And before it was really quite regional, and it would be what I would say a big fish in a very small pond, and had a lot of people who really thought they were very important, and I know now people think they're important, but it seems a little more muted, and they're open to other ideas. I think it's opened up tremendously. Chancellor Hurd was the one who was here who was, I think, really made a phenomenal difference. And over time, I really see how the seeds he planted have really helped, this place grow. And well, I'm involved in one of the Vanderbilt programs now, and if I hadn't really enjoyed it, I wouldn't have come back, and that's the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Vanderbilt. And this is designed for anyone over 50 years of age. It's a non-credit thing, but it is to keep everybody's neurons firing and try and give them quality of life at the end of the age, and as well as socialization. So we have over 1,400 members, and I came from that this morning where we're learning about Panama and learning about incarceration and what happens when it is all the people who DNA is now exonerating and so forth. So, there are lots of things that are going on that are discussion of ideas, and hopefully, especially in this world, to be able to discuss differences and not kill each other in the process, but try and look at other people's perspectives and learn something and grow.
Yeah. All right, okay. Well, those are my questions.
Okay.
I don't know.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for talking to me.
My pleasure. This was fun.